Next year, 2024, is the 70th anniversary of the crash of the KLM Super Constellation, the Triton, at Shannon Airport. Even though there were multiple events at Shannon between 1946 and 1961, most people tend to gravitate towards this event. There are probably several aspects to the crash that draw people in. First of all, the Shakespearean tragedy aspect of it. Captain Adrian Veruley, a very senior KLM captain on the cusp of retirement, very long career, and this awful event overtakes him within months of his retirement. Then there is the lottery aspect to the crash itself. 56 passengers on crew on board, and exactly 28 perish, 28 live. The crash had a very severe impact on the career of Captain Adrian Veruley. In fact, this was to be his final flight. He severed all links with aviation following the crash. During the course of a major hearing at Dublin Castle, much attention was focused on why the radio equipment at the tower was turned off, which had the effect of delaying the rescue effort which set forward from Foynes. And once again, I find myself with journalist Vincent Power on the banks of the Shannon estuary, right at the doorstep of Shannon Airport. And today we're talking about the 1954 crash of the KLM Triton Super Constellation. So Vincent, how are you today?
Great, it's just extraordinary to be here. It's something obviously we've been meaning to do for a long time, but it feels, you know, very, very surreal in a sense to be standing on a routine day. The normal routine life of the airport, as we can see, is just behind us, is unfolding as normal. It's quite a tranquil setting here actually this morning. We've got some rain overhead, but otherwise, you know, the tide is out, water is very flat, and yet it's extraordinary. I mean, it captures your imagination, captures my imagination, and I'm sure many viewers as well, to think that on a night, we've had a night of such high drama, on a normal routine night in September 1954, a regular transatlantic flight departing westbound, departs from runway 14, just behind us here, travels, and just an unfortunate sequence of events that occurs that dooms this plane even before it has managed to take any altitude or take off correctly. It fails to climb and it lands right in front of us here. In fact, we can make out the actual crash site here.
Absolutely, yeah.
Which is extraordinary to see as well. Right at a place called Middle Point, which is virtually midpoint in the estuary between the airport and Ringwoyland Pier, right on the other side. So at Middle Point, it's a very nondescript. I'm just looking at it here, and I mean, look, we're just looking at a nondescript mud flat.
It's the thing about the estuary, isn't it, Vincent, that sometimes it's hard to tell the sky from the
absolutely,
land.
but I just think in a way, I mentioned surreal. There is a surreality about it, really, in the sense that this is the actual spot where all this drama unfolds, and what a drama of human stories that occurred when this plane came right down on the mud flats. On impact, of course, as you know, it virtually breaks up on impact. The back of the fuselage is broken. It loses its starboard tail fin. It's submerged in the water, and of course, immediately when we speak about great dramas and unfortunately terribly tragic dramas, we've got, in the darkness, lights out. Electrical systems have failed on board because, of course, it's submerged in water. The electrics are knocked out in the darkness. The tragedy really would have happened at its most extreme level. Well, it happened right throughout the fuselage, but particularly at the rear of the fuselage, which of course is where the first class section was.
Because it was quieter back there.
Because it's quieter, but you know, in a tragic irony, as we know, one of the passengers in first class had actually changed seats. He had allowed an American. One of the Dutch passengers had permitted one of the American passengers boarding in Shannon to take his seat.
And that was because there was a big ruckus in the
it seems to
departures.
be,
There was almost a fight for it.
The generosity and the good-spirited nature of this Dutchman to give up. Not many people would do it today, Peter. I don't think many people would do it today.
Karma.
It'd be rare to find that generosity today. But isn't it, ironic that with such a spirit of generosity, giving up his seat to this American man, the Dutchman ends up towards the front of the aircraft where many of the passengers survived, and he survived. And the American, who had now probably thought he had good fortune in getting a seat in first class, he perishes. Because of course at the rear you had the incoming water, a combination of tragedies really, where you had the incoming water, the water was rising with the rising tide, but of course the main cause of death for all those, there was no fire, which is fortunate, it didn't go on fire, but the main cause of death was asphyxiation, because the fuel tanks had ruptured, fuel gas vapors were seeping into the fuselage, into the cabin. People were literally choking and were being knocked unconscious. Extraordinary. Then of course you had the flight crew desperately trying to, and the stewardesses opening emergency doors, emergency exits to do their best to get the passengers out. It was just extraordinary. I mean, I mentioned the aspect of, fortunately, not being a fire, but with all these, when you picture the scene, I mean, it really is the stuff of movies, really.
So 56 on board, that's passengers and crew. And by the end of the night, exactly half perished, half survived.
That's right. I mean, just even that story, I mentioned, fortunately, there had been no fire, but of course it was a lethal, dangerous, toxic environment. If you have aviation vapors seeping around the cabin, people succumbing to it. But towards the front of the aircraft, you had an American lady, Elizabeth Snyder, an advertising, young advertising executive from New York. She was sitting beside this gentleman, and it was quite normal to smoke on aircraft at that stage.
Of course it was.
It was routine to smoke. He produced a cigarette and a lighter, put a cigarette in his mouth, and she immediately sensed the danger. With very quick thinking, she snapped the cigarette match out of his hand, and she said, she screamed apparently out loud, "Do you want to blow us all up?" Which could well have happened.
It really could have ended like that.
It actually could well have happened. But meantime, you've got the captain, Adrian Verrier, who's a very experienced aviator. Ironically, again, for him, he was close to retirement after a long flying career, and an extraordinary character on many levels. An author who'd written aviation books, a poet, a man of many talents, it seems, but with a long career of flying behind him.
And just about to retire.
And just about to retire. I think a matter of months to retirement, probably. So he is now in the biggest drama of his life.
Absolutely.
Trying to save people.
At a time he never expected that this is going to happen.
Absolutely. So the immediate reaction is to try to evacuate the passengers, get them off the plane, to save as many lives as possible. The captain, Verrier, who has, of course, he has the rank. He has a stellar career behind him, and at one point he's been elevated to the rank of Commodore by KLM.
It's almost a kind of a maritime.
I suppose it's almost a maritime, but certainly I suppose it's a mark or a grade of respect to this man. So he holds the rank of Commodore in KLM, but he's assisted as captain with his co-pilot, his co-pilot is Edward Parfitt, from an Englishman from Bristol. So there, and of course the crew. Their immediate reaction is to evacuate the passengers. They need to get the dinghies in place. They need to get passengers into the dinghies. It's eyewitnesses, surviving passengers, tell of those dramatic moments that people were crying, people were praying, people were screaming, people were moaning. Obviously, the dying, probably towards the rear of the fuselage, were moaning. It was a shocking situation. Really.
And of course, then you had the situation that the two Americans went out through the emergency window
to the tail
obviously
fin.
because of the overpowering fumes,
to escape the fumes, and they swam to the tail unit, and because of circumstances we'll describe in a few minutes of the two, of course, only one survived. I gather they were there for hours on this tail fin. Now you can imagine in darkness clinging to a tail fin. The waters are rising. Of course, the position of the plane at that stage, as you know, is that the tail The tail of the plane has now sunk lower into the water. If you look at the front, you've got the nose, and the front part of the fuselage is clearly visible above the water. The wings are visible outstretched just beneath the water, but the tail is dipping lower into the water. They're clinging on for dear life, obviously. Also, I suppose it's really worth noting, while all this is happening, while the Captain Virulé and his co-pilot Parfit and the stewardesses, while they're desperately trying to get people into dinghies,
Helga,
they're trying to save lives. You've got the extraordinary bravery of a young woman, Helga
Lowenstein.
Helga Inga Lowenstein, of a Jewish background, of a Jewish family. She had joined KLM, but again, just unfortunately very sad family circumstances in her case, because she had survived the war. Her parents, Jewish in Nazi Germany, had been arrested. They had been in hiding. The whole family had been in hiding. I suppose something similar to a lot of Anne Frank and other Jewish families who were hiding and being sheltered by people anywhere they could. They had been in hiding in 1943 for various reasons, which happened at that time. The Gestapo discovered their whereabouts, and she managed to evade capture as a young girl. She would have been quite young at that stage. She managed to evade capture, but her parents were arrested, and they were taken to Sobibor extermination camp, and in the same year, 1943, they were gassed to death in Sobibor. As a young woman later, just after the war, she joined KLM, and she's now caught up, like Captain Virulé and like the others, at the young age of 24. And when we think of even young Irish people today, young Irish men and women at the age of 24, I mean, their whole lives are just opening up. You know, they'll have completed their education, they've got their whole life to look forward to. As indeed did Helga have her own life, her whole entire life to look forward to. And she's caught in this drama. Her first instinct in the middle of this drama is not to save herself. In fact, her instinct is to save other people, even though she has been injured as well in the collision. She gets people into the dinghies. So you've got this again, as we're looking out into the estuary this morning, we're looking at a still calm waters. But
Absolutely.
again, can you just imagine in darkness, two dinghies with people attempting to, of course they can, even more, I suppose even more incredible is the fact that they can actually see the lights of the airport from this mud bank we're looking at here, from the crack.
The extraordinary thing is, Vincent, the story of the Triton is a story of the danger of making assumptions, because the takeoff was observed by the tower, as well as two customs officers in the customs hall, and the two customs guys used to watching aircraft take off. They suspected there was something slightly wrong, because the flames which are produced, the nacelles of the Connie, just seemed to be slightly elongated that night. So they kind of had a sniff that something wasn't quite right.
There seemed to be a catalogue of errors actually, because of course radio contact was lost. Within 5 minutes of taking off, radio contact was lost. They assumed, again, you shouldn't make assumptions.
The tower tried to call them.
The assumptions, I think the tower tried to make contact with them, and the assumption there was that there had been radio failure or a radio breakdown.
Which happened in those days.
Which probably happened in those days. So, and as we know, there were several
and of course the tower got onto the outbound radar just to do a check, and thinking that they should be up around what's known as the Kilkee fan. And they got a report from, strangely enough, another KLM eastbound flight to say that they spotted it, they had it, but in fact that wasn't the aircraft at all. It was another strange aspect of the story, that the fire station were asked to put a spotlight on the river, just in case something had happened, just a hunch, on the basis of what the two boys had seen, the customs guys. They spotted a white light out on the river, Vincent, and again, it's the danger of making assumptions. They thought that was an eel fisherman out at
a fisherman,
3 o'clock in the morning, whatever it was, and that was it. In fact, that was somebody at the door trying to signal for help.
Yes, because I understand that they'd resort to flashlights.
Yeah,
They had battery operated flashlights. Of course there was no light. They were operating in darkness with flashlights.
The aircraft had no power, of course.
No power because it was submerged in water. So I imagine this may well have been the lights which were seen. And again, so tantalizingly close to the airport.
I know.
I mean, in all the history of aviation crashes and disasters we all know about, it's rare to find, very rare to find, the crash occurring so close. It has happened, obviously, but in all the crashes, it's quite unusual to find the crash so close to the airport, where people scrambling for rescue and for safety can actually see the lights of the airport. And again, we're as you know, Peter, that astonishing story. One of the crew members, the third pilot or navigator, a Dutchman called Johan Tiemann, who has been in one of those two dinghies trying to make, in very difficult conditions, trying to make for the shore in the middle of the night through the mud banks. This young Dutchman, part of the crew, the navigator, decides to make a go for it himself, and he leaps from one of the dinghies and attempts to wade and swim as possible through the waters and wade to reach where we're standing on the embankment here. And he does manage to make it. I mean, God knows, he obviously wondered would he survive at all, but through extraordinary determination and courage, he manages to make it to the bank. Meantime, because of a catalogue of assumptions, misunderstandings, errors, which would never happen today, I don't think it would happen today. The airport were not aware, the airport authorities were not aware of anything amiss. They assumed everything had been normal with the flight. There was no emergency for hours until I believe about 5, 6 a.m. in the morning. But the young Dutchman clambers on where we're standing, pretty much just close to where we're standing here, clambers from the mud bank, and of course he's distraught. He's covered in mud. He makes for the first building he can see towards the airport terminal here, which is, of course, is the fire station. Manages to alert people in the fire station, and also manages to alert people in the terminal, which is just beside the location as well. So, you know, again, you can just imagine the sheer astonishment of fire brigade personnel and airport workers on facing this extraordinary image of a man covered in mud, telling them he's just swum from a crash plane. I mean, it really is the stuff of movies, actually. It really is the stuff of movies.